All right. So
non-Seattle
thank you
people.
everybody for being here. This is the third Quoala Conversations, and today we have John Kobara with us. In case anybody didn't see his stuff from LinkedIn. I worked with John, full disclosure, back when we were doing online learning for higher education. And so that was for Sylvan, spun off a company called the Laureate Education. That's right, Laureate Education. So not the Lightspan Partnership. That was before I met John. So, the conversation today is about human AI collaboration. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few moments and I'm going to do a share screen. I'm going to share a couple of slides for housekeeping and the backdrop, and then I'm going to shift to the conversation with John. Then we might break out into some small breakout rooms, because I think we have roughly 2 rooms worth, maybe 3 if we do less people. And then we'll come back, and that's today's agenda. Okay, so let's just go ahead and share that screen. And let me go back. Okay, so today's conversation, finding your true answer, AI-powered connections and collaboration. 5 minutes of housekeeping. There are 2 ways to interact with this event. You can interact like usual, and because we're a small group, I expect that most of us will. But we do offer this new way of interacting, which is where you scan this QR code, and don't worry, we'll provide it in the chat. You don't have to scan it really quickly before I move on from the slide. And then you load up the Quoala interface, and you hit start, and then you go on mute, and you turn off your video, and you treat this meeting just like it was an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000, which, if you don't know what that is, those 3 little silhouettes in the front are people who watch some of the worst movies ever made and just speak over the dialogue and say whatever it is they feel like saying to critique the movie in real time. And if you do that with this application, you'll be speaking to an AI, which will capture all of what you say and not reveal what you said, but give us some broad themes like lame, burnout, incredible, just like that bubble chart you see there on that example. But if you do choose to do that, please mute your PC microphone so that we don't hear you speaking the whole time, and maybe turn off your video if you want. So, and then for those of you who choose to use the recorder, if you see that, usually it appears after 5 minutes, you hit stop and restart. Today's conversation is AI-powered connections and collaboration. And the backdrop to this is John is a professional, mentor, somebody who knows how to do connections and collaborations across diverse groups of people. And Quoala, the sponsor of this event, specializes in trying to advance groups of people speaking to an AI, and then having leaders ask follow-up questions of the large groups of people. And the way that works with Quoala is the AI is supposed to keep everybody anonymous, supposed to be unbiased, supposed to be just there to represent the concepts that come through. This is an example of one of the aspects that Quoala measures. This is the humility index. And you can see what the positive words driving humility and what the negative ones are in this example. And what this does for organizations is, in the past, you do pulse surveys and you get average pulse is 4.0, right? And you have a submission rate, and you know that there's a certain number of people who are going to fill it out and a certain number of people who won't, especially if they don't have a desk. And now with Quoala or with AI, you can have something that says, well, your thriving index is up, your motivation index is up, but your humility, awareness, and your retention are going to all go down. And with this example in particular, what do you think is happening in that organization, right? Anybody care to guess? When you have humility, awareness, and exit all going the wrong way, but thriving and motivation going up? In this particular case, it's some high performers or a major change happening that's driving everybody to try to adapt, right? Or high performers who are driving everybody else insane with their pushiness. So just one example of a kind of a pattern you might be able to see in the future. So this is the QR code again. Like I said, Jury is going to share that in the chat for everybody here.
It's in the chat.
It's in the chat. Great. So I'm going to stop the share. And then I'm going to turn it over to the first moment for John to speak. And then John, could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about your own context for this conversation? Like, what do you hope to get out of it, or what would you like to see us talk about?
Can't I tell the truth about you?
Yeah, sure. You can do that too.
I have some truths about Michael. I've been involved for a number of industries, number of things, every sector, lots of things, so startups to big box things. And I retired about 3.5 years ago when I was working in philanthropy. Last 12, 15 years in philanthropy, helping people give money away. We had about 1,700 foundations. So I was working with a lot of people, a lot of organizations, a lot of things. But as Michael alluded to, I've been having lots of conversations with people over a long period of time. I've been teaching on the side since 1992, workshops for career change and career development with Fortune 500 companies, and primarily, but also universities. And so I've had lots of conversations about change, about how people feel about things, their sense of satisfaction, their connection to things, what they want, how they want to be a part of a good culture, a good boss, those different things. And right now, I'm consulting with a number of organizations, and the question that's been asked of me is kind of a referendum on leadership. All these organizations are doing well. They have money, they're growing, they have lots of positive things. But the C-suite wants to understand what the culture is, what is happening in the culture. So I've actually interviewed all the executives or all the middle managers or whatever it is. It's incredibly time consuming to try to get a measure from some objectivity, trusting me, not trusting me, giving me thoughts about their perspective, about the organization, what works, what doesn't, what they would like to change, what they like to keep, why they're there and what keeps them there, those are the main questions that I ask. So I think one of the reasons why Michael asked me to be here is of that kind of breadth of conversations and my insight into what people are wanting and needing. And what's really challenging, and I think Quoala is going to help bridge this ultimately, is how do you have real-time or quasi-real-time sentiment about key constituencies, key stakeholders, including employees, versus the annual review or other archaic, institutionalized mechanisms that don't really get at the truth. I will stop there.
Yeah. All right. So, so John, one of the things I'd like to do is in this conversation is tackle what I think is one of the top challenges for Quoala. I mean, we were just presenting to the GMs for a startup company, not a startup, but a company that does restaurants. There's 9 GMs in the room. Each of them had more than 100 employees running restaurants, right? And they wanted to know what they should say to their people to get the conversation started. Yes, there's a question that comes from the VP, but these are the GMs. And the VP's question, the employees could just answer it and then be done. But that's not going to generate this feeling of conversation. This also is not going to reiterate the moment of self-reflection, practice in self-reflection, I guess is another way to put it. And it's kind of a central concept in all dialogue, this ability to get somebody comfortable speaking, either with you or in this case, with just a record button. Could you maybe share some of your thoughts and tips about what makes that work, and maybe, I don't know, challenge us to think about how we could do you think we would do it for Quoala?
Yeah, I think the whole thing about having a trusting conversation is something that can happen rather quickly, but the word trust and respect are the words that are always used in these conversations I have. I don't know if I can trust it. I don't know if I'm respected. There's mutual respect. So there's no instant. I wouldn't be on this call if there was if I had the instant answer to trust and respect. I could just make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And GMs that want techniques or some gimmicks to initiate a trusting and respectful conversation are into a world of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to skirt your question slightly because I think, how do you create a culture where people speak up and say the truth and have staff meetings where people challenge each other and diverse opinions are valued? I mean, how do you have that? We all want it and we rarely see it. And you can predict with some certainty that people aren't going to speak up because they don't want to sound stupid or they don't want to lose face in an organization. So for the GMs at restaurants who have a very hierarchical system of management, it's going to be based on the way the hiring practices of those GMs and the way if they've not hired people that are going to manage to the bottom line only and who have a real self-awareness and human EQ about who they're working with and why they're there. I don't know how to answer that question, Michael. It's a challenging question to me.
Well, okay, then I'll throw an easier one out there. What would you think that Koala would do, or in facing the challenge of advising potential customers, whether they be GMs for restaurants or the head of a very large HR organization, or whatever customers we're facing in the near future? We know the first time our users are going to pick up the record button, they're going to say, I want more pay, I want more time off, and I want to be more respected. I mean, basically. And that's just the people who do speak up, right? And then we want to get past that window. We want to get them to speak again later when they're in a slightly different mindset. Maybe maybe on the drive home from work, and you say, well, today this went right, this went wrong, whatever it is, like something where it's a way to relax or get steam off or unload or de-stress, or really self-reflect, but in a way that is not forcing people to take meditation class or something like that. Right. So forced meditation, right? So, but this has obviously come up in other contexts without AI. So what are your thoughts?
The whole thing about this Quoala solution or an AI solution where people are going to be able to speak, quote unquote, anonymously about what they're feeling about things. To really have an accurate, these organizations I'm dealing with, they're dealing with net promoter scores for internal stuff, or they're dealing with net promoter scores for external things. There's so many limitations to these vehicles and these measurement tools. But there's a big if, and you and I talked about it, Michael, is how to get people to be trusting of a technology, even surveys that are anonymous surveys, a lot of devices that are being used by HR consulting firms. There's a lot of suspicion about them and how they're going to be used against them. So that's a big issue of trust within an organizational culture. I think one of the issues that is emerging that I think we all know well, that's been very prominent during the COVID time, which is the institutions, employers, level of sort of empathy towards the whole life of an employee, the portfolio of an employee. So if really you come to work and really you just got to do what you got to do, and there's not a consciousness about the development of the human being, which companies think that and want to do that, but there is a resistance toward that. That is one of the biggest undermining factors right now in my conversations about culture, is the needs of the individual that overlap with the portfolio of the company, if you will. So a koala, if the big trust thing, we get over the trust thing, we say, hey, they'll use it. They'll just use it. They think it's fair. They think it's real. They don't have a worry about the misuse of this information because it's going to be anonymized into thematic information. It will be, biased towards the verbal. It'll be biased toward people who can dictate or who can speak well, kind of on the spur of the moment. And that's a slice of humanity that's in particular jobs, and particular profiles. I guess you could type it in too, less probably efficient, and also the truthfulness in a typed in survey is undermined by thinking about words and so forth and just talking. So again, I think it's useful because I think people would like to contribute to a real-time composition of how things are going, but there is that pretty substantial obstacle.
Well, I think you're right that first there's the trust obstacle, but we're fond of saying we don't have to outrun the bear, right? If you have a 100-person organization, one of the questions that the GMs asked me straight up was, what is success, right? How many people saying how much, right? And because I knew they were just trying to figure out how much effort they had to put into this, right? And I said, if you had 5 people in a 100-person restaurant who were committing to speaking daily because it was startup shift, or it was a part of the routine to getting the day started, or maybe it was a part of the routine to shutting the day down. I don't know, or maybe both, or maybe something else, or maybe one week was about griping and another week was about hyping, right? But if you just had 5 people providing that context, then you're getting enough data for the leadership to respond, to say, hey, this is a theme I'm picking up. Could you say more? And we believe that will do several things. One, it'll demonstrate that it is thematic, that we can identify who somebody is. 2, it'll demonstrate that you can't just say, I want more money, I want more money, I want more money. Like, that's not gonna, make a difference. But it does give leadership the opportunity, the excuse to ask follow-up questions that are more feeling, more inquisitive, ask people to talk about things at a level that's not just high-level hype. That's our theory. And obviously, there's going to be people who are just going to not trust it, period. End of story. We know that. But we don't have to win 100%. We just have to have a model that takes us from those initial 5 to 10 to 15, so that we can move it forward. If you imagine this, John, succeeding, what happens when it becomes normalized in any organization you choose to imagine, right? And I don't mean like panacea, but I mean like it's different. It's not a survey, right? It's just taking some time each day to talk about your journey at this company. In fact, I said that to the GMs who were preparing. I said, look, whether they recognize it or not, your employees are a part of I'm sorry, I almost said the name of the company, a part of this company's journey. And they're on their own life journey. And that's worth taking a moment to reflect on the meeting of the two. If we can convince just a few to do it. Obviously, since I'm heavily involved in the company, John, I tend to overestimate how important this is, right? But I want a little bit of a reality check, right? I want, like, in your wildest example of a success in this, are we looking at people saying, oh, this, I can't imagine not working this way, right? Or is this just another type of pulse survey, right? Where we have to keep re-upping the ante to get them to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question you're asking that's more interesting to me, I think having the 5 and maybe the tip of the iceberg or the tipping point of the group, as long as those 5 are somewhat representative, which we would never know. I mean, 5 out of 100 is, on one level tantamount to having a suggestion box.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't, suggestion boxes are diabolical little things that don't really necessarily represent trends. But I mean, to your bigger question about if this was more accepted and people were doing it, just based on my most recent experiences with several organizations, if I was an AI bot that people thought was trusting, and because they trusted me for whatever reason,
Hmm.
because of the kind of information that they divulged to me was quite extraordinary, um, and including information about compensation and other things. But uh, I think if that could be done on a quasi-regular basis, or at least on a sampling basis, on a regular sampling basis, to give again data, information, trending to leadership to gauge how they communicate, what they're communicating about, what the questions and issues are, the conspiracy theories of the day, how they communicate about pay equity, for example. It's interesting. More pay was not the biggest issue ever in any of these conversations.
Hmm.
Equity was an issue. Um, um, where are we benchmarking to was an issue on pay, but those are really pale in comparison to the other cultural norms of, actually what is success was actually one of the biggest questions. How do we define success now? What is the success, financially, but the other dimensions of success? So I think having a outlet for people that was sampling or consistent or, providing some trend data to leadership is absolutely essential. I don't think companies have any idea what's going on beneath the surface right now. My brother ran for many years a mystery shopping company, and so I have a lot of thoughts about mystery shopping, and what was discovered during those mystery shopping by tens of thousands of shoppers going into restaurants and stores and so forth and so on. And how people were greeted and how they were treated, a million things, again, from a very specific standpoint. And not every company does those things, right? But what those reports showed was an extraordinary challenge. And I think today it's even more diverse and more, the spectrum is even broader, meaning the challenges they're facing, particularly with, employment, job openings, lots of issues going on right now with retention. So I think a tool is needed. I absolutely think a tool. I think getting the major thing within organizations is trust without regard to whether they're using technology or not.
Hmm. So you mentioned a lot of interesting things there, but I'd like to follow up on one of them in particular, which was, pay me more was not the number one. That you were sitting down with people and asking them to talk about their jobs and hopefully making them feel comfortable enough to speak the truth. What just struck you? What surprised you about all those conversations that you've been having? Like, what came across as something you didn't expect or that you expected to be strong?
Just one thing on compensation. It ended up I got into conversations that I didn't even think I was going to have with the head of HR and certainly the C-suite. And what I asked, one of the first questions I asked was, what is the compensation philosophy, the written compensation philosophy of this company? And they didn't have one. I found that extraordinary. None of the organizations. And the compensation philosophy is not that we have salary bands that we mark to the marketplace. There's one thing. But who are you trying to be in the 75th percentile of your peer group? Are you, how do you benchmark your salaries from a competitive standpoint?
Right.
Not that you just have salary bands and you look at them from time to time and you hire a consultant who reviews them, or they're similar to what your competition is. And there's that, but they didn't have a compensation philosophy. For example, compensation philosophy is the most modern ones today, which, will mark the CEO to the receptionist and what is going to be the differential.
Right.
So
Right.
that's a compensation philosophy that is modern, not that everybody wants to do that. But anyway, so that was just interesting, kind of a side note about compensation, that compensation philosophies don't exist. I just was shocked by that. At very sophisticated, large organizations. They don't have one. So go back to non-compensation. Besides the classic stuff, how one of the things, again, these aren't surprises, but everybody knows, and we can all kind of cringe when we hear these things. You know, the way staff communications is used today. You know, how do you do staff communications now with Teams? You know, I don't mean Teams, Microsoft Teams. I mean, how do you collect people and tell them things about what's going on? What's the purpose of those meetings? How are those? What's the agenda of those meetings? How is communication a vibrant part of people's lives in terms of keeping them in touch with what's going on and what's important? It's really deteriorated in these organizations, and that's just kind of classic because you know, it's hard. It's hard to do communications and what to be able to say and what do people want.
But what do you think is causing the deterioration? I mean, is it more generations in the workplace? Is it the digital transformation? Is it?
It's you know, it's like everything. It's super complicated. I mean, you have you know, they want to have in-person meetings, right? Once in a while, but then when do they have those in-person meetings now with hybrid and remote and all the crazy diversity things that we've accepted? Second, you know, we're using multiple platforms. Everybody said, okay, we have Slack, we have Asana. People like to use the chat function. We're also texting, but people aren't using email. The old school wants email, but nobody responds. I mean, it was all that, which we all know that's going on. So there's not been a prioritization of how we communicate. Are we using Zoom? You know, we hate Zoom. We love Zoom. We hate Teams. We love Teams. All that stuff. And it's because each of the teams and different departments are using different things, there's not a shared world anymore. So the staff meeting becomes so highly pressurized to be incredibly pithy and amazing, and it's never going to be that. So communication, which has always been, I think, one of the biggest challenges. There is the generational stuff, which we don't have to go into, but one of the collisions in the generations is, I'm not going to be here for that long, younger generation. So, you know, make my path really worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
I really need a prescribed, amazing, growth-oriented path. When there isn't one, there's not one, and so there's that thing that's old versus new, sort of some stuff like that. But the biggest thing was tying people's understanding to the greater purpose and mission of the organization and how my job is relevant to that is less clear today, besides profitability, besides making more money, which totally everybody gets. In addition to that, what are the priorities from an organizational structure? And there'll be those that say, well, there is no other, it's financial and nothing else. But that's not satisfying to the current world today.
Right.
People want to have a multidimensional sense of purpose that's beyond dollars. So that wasn't, these are not surprising. You asked me what's surprising. None of this was shocking.
Right.
The compensation philosophy thing was surprising to me, but and you know, HR there's also a devolution of HR, because HR has now become, in my opinion, even more based on compliance. You have these vectors that have gone through the organization about DEI, political correctness, a million things that have frozen HR from doing some more organizational growth, organizational design stuff that really sophisticated HR departments need to do and have to do for organizations to adapt. Seems to be on the downside.
Interesting. So, John, here's what I want. My dream is that I have a technology. I don't care if it's Quoala or not, but what I care about is that we have a technology that makes people understand or makes people feel or makes real the statement, what you say matters. That the idea that if I take the time to say something, that the world cares. So this is my dream, right? John. That's why I'm doing Koala. That's why I'm having this conversation with you right now.
Yep.
I want people who don't even consider that what they say matters to understand that what they say matters. Um, and and I think I'm on the best path I could discover, right? Given the resources I have and the connections I have and the people around me, I believe I'm on the best path. But uh, I mean, you know a little bit about me and my and how I pursue things with a technology angle and how sometimes I have trouble being understood. So, I mean, you've been front and center when I have confused the heck out of a panel of executives. And
Long ago. Yeah.
so, so John, what would you ask me? How would you get me to discover or think about this dream I have? Maybe in relation to Koala, or maybe just, how would you interview me?
Yeah. So, I think to get into organizations that are going to adopt this kind of idea,
Mm-hmm.
the alignment at the top has to be very strong. I actually, so one of the things I would ask you to consider and react to right now is I work with a consulting firm that I've never seen this before, which does an ethos exam of its clients.
Ethos exam of clients.
So in
Interesting.
other words, they ask the client to take an ethos exam, meaning what are your values?
Mm-hmm.
We would like to work with you, but if we're not aligned, we'll just opt out and give you somebody better because we're not aligned with you. So I say that as an example, only that I think, particularly in the early stages of Koala, I think alignment with organizational leadership as it relates to the desire and interest of finding out what Koala can do to get traction needs to be aligned on the ethos of the organization. I don't know what other way to say it. I mean, it's not just a moral thing, and it's not just a strategic thing. It's a alignment with the human values that are going to emerge out of a critical conversation that is truthful, that is valued, that is mutually respected. So the question I have for you is, finding companies, there are companies that are going to raise their hand and we need you because we're in trouble. Those are companies you probably want to stay away from because what you're going to amplify in Koala, in Koala will be blamed and just by being the speaker of bad culture, like,
Right.
wow, thanks a lot for amplifying all the badness within the organization. You have to, and you're not just finding good companies, but you find companies that are really interested, have a deep sense of curiosity, are learning organizations. And I got to tell you, that's not as many as we'd like it to be.
Yeah.
Top. So I would say, how would you align, particularly in this quasi-piloting, whatever testing phase, this phase of mutual exploration, finding mutuality. Yeah.
Well, I actually don't think we're going to find that, at least not as often as I would like, and not to
Yeah.
be a successful business. I think that we have to deal with the stark reality that there's a lot of organizations that don't care about culture in the context that you are currently speaking. If I can just broadly allude to it rather than define it, because that would take some energy. I think they only care about upping their retention numbers or having an impact on something that affects their bottom line. And if Koala gets usage, it does affect their bottom line, regardless of whether or not they're able to sustain the dialogue.
Yeah.
Right. Now, if it's just 5 people, it's not going to make any difference. The 5 people is a start. That's how you get moving. But I think that if Koala is to succeed, or if anything that I do in this world of trying to value what people say, right, it has to start with the most base function that's operating with my potential customer base. And I think you're right that I'm not going to find a ton of customers who are like, yeah, culture is important to me. And because first of all, if those customers, they're already spending a lot of money and engaging in very interesting ways with their employees. This might save them money, right? This might improve the efficiency of what they're doing, but it's not introducing a totally new concept to them. I think what I'm in the business of doing, or what we're in the business of doing, is introducing a new concept that affects the bottom line. But if you interact with it for 6 months to a year, it starts to change your mentality, at least to some percentage of the people we engage with. Dan, I see you have a question.
Maybe more of a comment or a suggestion. But like, as you've been talking about kind of how do you get people to open up, or how do you get people to get past that initial hurdle of like they need to vent first before they... You were reminding me a lot of something that a politician once told me, that, and he's talking a little bit about like people who talk about politics on the internet, but hearing about it from an actual elected official really made it sound very different. But he said that the people who tend to speak the loudest about politics tend to speak that way because they have no power. And that really gave me a lot to think about, because part of what you're talking about is the employees are struggling with opening up about how they haven't been given power by the people you're having your conversations with at the leadership level. And so to some degree, I think my suggestion is, I think your goal is to, how do you pitch the executives on framing the job in such a way that their employees feel empowered on some level, and particularly empowered in a way that still drives towards the goalpost of the organization accomplishing some sort of a goal and making some money along the way.
I think that's a great point. And I think that I think that ties back to something John said right at the beginning, which is which I didn't expect him to say, which was that there's a certain type of person who feels comfortable just speaking, and that other people don't feel comfortable speaking, right? That they prefer to type, or which frankly I almost dismissed early on, because I'm thinking, well, we're human beings, and writing has been around for a fraction of the time that human beings have been around. So what are you talking about, right? But I get it, and I can't just dismiss it. But John, what do you think of Dan's comment and how it relates to the conversation we were just having? Like, is there a thread there, or are we, in terms of this audience, the people who are interested in this technology and how it's not just this technology, that's the wrong way to put it, but just the concept of what we say matters, and tools that help companies retain more workers and generate more respect. How do you think that fits in with the thread? What's popping in your mind right now, John?
Well, I appreciate Dan's perspective. I think there's a lot to be said about the kind of the squeaky wheels. Who are squeaky wheels, and how does that happen, and whether they're feeling empowered? I think there is something that's very powerful about the notion of Koala and this conversation, which is democratizing empowerment in a way that gives every voice something that matters. And how does that get contributed right now? Because it's not in the surveys, it's not in the staff meetings for sure. And even the performance reviews where, enlightened companies get, say, hey, we had the performance reviews this year, and here's what something that came out of the performance reviews. That's what an enlightened company would do. We got this feedback, and it's curated, and but versus nothing happened with the performance reviews. The world, we just move on. It's a transaction that's unimportant, irrelevant to the human beings in the organization. So I think the notion of empowerment, as Dan was talking about, and giving people a way of having some influence, or at least giving the leadership a chance. This is why I go back to, Michael, not so much about low-hanging fruit, which is not even a thing, but I mean, having companies that are already bought in. I'm saying companies that every company, by the way, from the top says they're supporting better culture. I mean,
Right.
that's just the thing. But how do they actually engage and or have the courage to listen? Because it is going to be a referendum on them.
Yeah.
It's a brutal referendum on leadership. And so who wants that? You don't want a job, we'll get new people. I mean, there's a very disposable notion by some leaders. So I think for those that have some enlightenment and openness and who also want to build on strength versus trying to solve toxic problems, because that's really not I don't think it's big of an opportunity. Building on strength and trying to grow more and expand and do what they need to do. The idea of empowerment, democratizing input, about connecting dots within the organization, I think is very powerful.
All right, so I have just two quick questions. We're going to do just two breakout rooms, and then we'll come back for final word. One, do you think that introverts would find it easier to speak to the microphone than any other method they have for having their voice heard? That's number one.
That's to me, or it's to the group?
No, that's to you.
Oh. I think, again, overcoming the trust thing in the privacy of their car or their phone or whatever, and saying, today was a good day for these reasons, today was a bad day for these reasons. I think there'll be people that can do that. But I don't know if you've ever watched anybody try to record a voicemail message. It's one of the most hysterical things in the world for people who are not comfortable with their own voice. They don't like their voice. And then they do it 100 times. It's a greeting on their voicemail. Hi, this is John. Leave them that. I mean, I've watched that so many times by introverts. Mm-hmm. And of course, the extroverts say something funny and they want to do something clever, and they just do it and they don't care what it says. But the introverts want to get it right. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying all introverts.
Yeah.
But I think there is a challenge.
Okay. And then actually, I'm looking at our numbers here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Actually, we can just open it up for questions. This is now an open dialogue. If this is a breakout room size. So, Jay,
can you stop sharing the screen, or do we need to have the QR code there?
Oh no, I did that earlier.
I asked Michael to put it back up because people were having troubles with the QR code in the chat.
Okay.
So I had asked Michael to put the QR code back up.
Right.
Yeah.
And then if anybody's comfortable coming back on video, that's fine. If not, that's also fine. But
I do want to note, in my experience with introverts, a lot of the introverts that I know are more comfortable doing things like leaving voice notes or, like doing things behind the scenes. So I personally, not just because I'm invested personally in like my time and my energy and stuff in Quoala, and I really believe in this, I'm not just saying it because of that. I truly see introverted friends of mine feel more comfortable behind things like phones or screens or talking into things like that.
Well, and
that's my 2 cents on that.
When we did our last implementation, we actually put a sentence underneath the record button that said, don't worry about saying it just right. You can say it again and again and again until it comes out the way you want. The AI does not mind, and nobody's ever going to see it, right? So we put that in there just for exactly that reason, where it's like we were sensitive to what John's pointing out. Dan, did we understand the question you asked? And anybody else, can you raise your hand if you have a comment or a thought about this idea of getting people to speak up, right? Whether it's with technology or just in your business life. So, Dan, you're still on mute.
Yeah. I think you understood the question.
Or the nudge or the suggestion.
Kind of. And I appreciated, the responses that you had adding to it. I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about in the time since then is that, like, when you speak a certain way because you don't have power, then you start to probe the question of, well, what does it sound like to speak as someone who it can be entrusted with power, who has earned being entrusted with power. And I think most people haven't really put thought into, like, how do I speak in a way that, kind of works toward building that sort of trust and earning that kind of power. Because a part of it is this kind of very self-assuring culture. You're always worth it.
Well, I am.
You're wonderful the way you are. All those kinds of things, and which is not to say that everybody's terrible, but it's to say that being our best selves is effort, and it takes learning. And so, part of getting people to speak, to executives is, to kind of probe the question of, well, okay, so if you did have power, what would you do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And how would you do that in a way that moves the whole team together forward, not just you as an individual?
Mm.
And that's part of what I kind of love about Koala as a technology, is that I feel like there's a lot of potential for it to be that bridge of finding that collective voice that people don't know they have.
I think that what you're describing is what we don't know how to describe yet, right? This idea of that collective voice, where we're like, it's not a survey, but that's not enough just to say what it's not, right? I completely agree with what you're saying. John, thoughts?
I was thinking about just something completely different. I don't know if this is happening to you, but it seems like everywhere you do any transaction, will you stay on the phone? Will you just stay? We'd like to give you a couple questions about your experience today, blah, 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 right? And if it's a up and down, there's one thing. But what they're trying to get some indicators, obviously trying to build up their ratings and so forth and so on. And I think there is, just like, for example, I'm dealing with a friend of mine who's really challenged with doctors and needs advocacy for her doctors, right? And so doesn't know how to ask the questions. Even if we're there, we can ask questions, but they're not her questions. You know what I mean? Try to get her to assert for herself. But if she could, when she's not with the doctor, because she's not in the intimidation room, she has lots of interesting questions. So we, of course, write those down. So the intimidation factor in the staff meeting, confronting somebody is very challenging. But on the sidelines, some people, many people, introverts, I think included, but could use an avenue like this to pose questions or thoughts or comments or give opinions that are really valuable. And I think companies that are really truly interested in sustainability as relates to their human resources, have to invest in something like this. They just have to. It's so inadequate what is occurring, in my humble opinion. And I think it's getting worse. That's kind of what I think. I think there's a lot of centrifugal forces that are pulling people, that have less of a loyal foot in the door of employment. And that is generational, but it's also the post-COVID thing. There's a lot of other things. It's the, quiet quitting. It's the great resignation. It's a million things, but it has to do with loyalty. And so now you're trying to reconnect with loyalty, right? Which is a challenging thing.
Yeah, it's like you're going against the current, right?
It's going against the current. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It just, you have to be conscious of the current.
Yeah.
I like how you brought up that HR is different today and has become more based on compliance. When HR used to be that place that employees were supposed to feel safe going to if they had a problem. And now if they go with a serious problem that they feel like they're supposed to talk about, they're at risk of being fired or being because HR doesn't have that human element that it used to. So I like that you pointed that out.
Yeah. Although that some would argue that certain segments of HR have always been compliance based, but there's always been that. Jake, yes?
I was just going to agree with that HR is, their number one job is to truly look out for the company. I mean, they put the pretty sticker on there that they're there for the people, but that's why a lot of companies are building out people services, and why these tools are obviously so important, so we can actually get real down to the meat of the problem. And we were talking a lot on building trust and things like that, and I think some of the problems that Koala would have, or one of them I could think of, and I think I mentioned it in a previous session, would be that trust, right? It's going to be very similar, like, oh well, I'm going to fill this survey out, just put a bunch of 4s or 5s or whatever, and then I'm done with it because nothing's ever going to happen from this. And that would be a potentially really good differentiator to have say, hey, this is now we're not only giving frontline management, middle management the appropriate information for them to actually action something, but they actually are actioning it. And then, you're reporting up to the executives and stuff, and they're going to speak culture, and they're going to say that, that's what they care about. In reality, though, they care about the bottom line. They care that their company is operating and running and they're making money. And, some of them will understand that it's people, and others will look at the people as disposable, or just, they can just replace them super easily. But, when you can actually instill a product or something that actually gets actionable, like results, then, that is what you can actually just shoot back up to and say, hey, our retention is 20% better since last quarter, or, we have a better sense of belonging across all employees, or if maybe even segment it down to, we talked DEI, I was touched on that, right? So our female engineers are finding it, much more engaging with their leadership, and we're actually getting promotional paths and career development for them, and they're all feeling that, is actually making good, positive progress at everybody. That we all talk, but we're really trying to action out there. And I think once those results start to present themselves, then the trust is just going to happen. And it will be much easier to do that with something like this as it would be opposed to just, again, a survey where you might get 20% of your employees to fill it out. I don't know what the actual percentage is. And of those 20%, are they actually given true answers, or are they just kind of click on a bunch of 5s because they have politics? They're just forced to, right?
Yep.
So,
well, I'd like to think that. Well, here's an example of that challenge in action. Okay, John, this happens when you're done with all the interviews. Okay, and now you have to talk to management. And for you probably get to talk to them more than once as you're doing all the interviews, because it takes place over time. Whereas with this system, I don't get to talk to these leaders more than, say, once per cycle, right? Whatever their cycle is, it could be a month. And what I have to do is I have to point to the data and say, one data point is meaningless. One data point doesn't mean anything. People could have had food poisoning that week. People could have, found somebody else's salary on the copy machine. Somebody there's like all sorts of things that could have happened in various weeks. So in order to get a baseline, you have to convince them that you're interested in this conversation for more than a month, right? And so you're now going to ask a follow-up question, and I'm going to give you advice right now about how to word that follow-up question. That, to me, is how you get to actually having a cultural baseline, right? Jake, to what you're pointing out, I'll never get to you're retaining many more workers until the system is around long enough for the integration to take place, which means the value has to be perceived long before we get to that point. That's just a fact of life. And John has to deal with this in his own way. John, when you're talking to these leaders, you already have a great reputation, you have a brand, usually they know you, right? But you still have to judge what you can say and what you can't, and how you're going to be unbiased, but also raise the concerns that matter to the people who you were talking to. What are your thoughts on sort of this journey that we have of showing value before the real value is present that Jake was talking about?
Well, I'm going to take a second swing at the bat on my thing about alignment.
Yeah.
I think there is a predisposition about leadership about these certain assumptions about human beings. And I think, many of them may say things and have a disconnect on their actions. But so, when you look at, social determinants of health right now, or you look at vital conditions work that's being done in communities, or you look at a variety of different indicators about human resources that are more enlightened. It is trend based. It's not an annual review thing. It's not a one time kind of things, and those are very inaccurate for some of the reasons you already pointed out, but mostly because they're so transactional, they're not connected to the life cycle of what's happening, right? That's what's real. And I think anybody who wants to understand what's happening, in real life of any science-based things, it's trending. It's a trend analysis that you have to really look at. I work with a Fortune 100 company CEO, and who wanted to change retention rates through a variety of different initiatives. And the retention rates were dramatically improved through this process. But if he didn't want to do it and measure it and see the results of it and double up on activities and abandon activities that didn't work, it doesn't work. I mean, I also was with a CEO recently who didn't want to look at exit interview data, which I thought was really bizarre. Not really interested why people are leaving. They're leaving. It's like strange. Like that would be one of the main things you would want to look at if you're trying to understand, because people aren't just leaving because they got a better job or because they want to move out of the country. It's a variety of reasons. But the flow of things requires you to look more than 1 month or one time and look at trends. And exit interview data, if it's done well, is fascinating and interesting. It is not everything. You're not going to make changes to the company, but you're certainly going to evaluate what's happening in the company based on those trends.
Got it. Yep. All right. Are there any more questions? I want to shift gears and start thanking John and giving people their day back. And I wanted to know if there's anything else that's on everybody's mind. Dan, Jake, thank you for your questions. And I think Diana's there, but she always does this method. I like this. So,
yes, I'm here.
Yeah, I know.
My burning question is, okay, how can we get this into the hands of companies and get this making a difference in the lives of employees?
That's what we're working on.
Yeah.
That's what we're working on hard every day.
Get back to you on that. Right on there.
Are there any early adopters yet? Have you?
Yes, we have about 5 deals that are close, and we have 1 early adopter who's already adopted. The posters are up, and the employees have started speaking, and we have a Fortune 500 company that wants to launch. So this is happening, people. This is happening.
It seems like once we start to talk about it and once we start to explain it and like show the app, it's really hard for people to find opposition. And typically the opposition is like, well, is it truly anonymous? Or things like what you guys brought up, like, well, what if management doesn't like it because it's going to make them look bad or something like that.
Well,
but there's never any like super strong opposition. It's more like, why didn't this happen sooner?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Cool.
So
And Michael, there's a survey instrument that I've used at a couple of organizations that I don't think is very popular. It's called the Denison. And what the Denison does is it interviews leadership in a very profound way. So it's just a survey tool. Mm-hmm. And then it interviews middle management, and then it interviews the base employees. And when you see dramatic differences, I mean, really crazy differences in the perceptions of culture and trust, on the basic values of the company, on mission alignment, on lots of different things. Mm-hmm. It's a company that has to look in the mirror and go, why is this that we have? And on the levels of the penthouse and the bottom floor have no view of the world the same, And right. We know why that is on some levels, but there's such a huge disconnect. And I think Quoala could also do these trend analysis by the echelon of the organization by saying, well, the upper tier feels that everything is great, which is what usually is the case. And then the middle management, they're crushed. Right. They're just crushed. Mm-hmm. And maybe down below, it's not as bad. Right. Because it's just a different, whatever. I mean, many different versions.
Yeah.
That Jake?
I was just saying middle management holding it all together, trying
Yeah.
to
I know, because they're really getting it from both sides, aren't they?
They're always
keeping their
pro.
bosses happy and trying their hardest to keep employees, engaged. And, yeah.
In
It's a
the
tough job.
companies that you've sold this to so far, like
Yeah.
how are they going to roll it out? Are they going to have it just everybody, it's a free for all and everyone across the company can say whatever they want whenever, or is it hierarchical and there's like,
No, the very first company we're doing, it's one QR code, because we only break things out by QR code. So if we did the echelons example that John just said, we would have to make sure that nobody from a lower echelon got the QR code for the upper echelons and vice versa, right?
to taint the result.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I'm thinking of incentivizing it at like say I'm a director level, and at least I can get a feel for what's going on in my org, and then give them feedback faster than the entire company feedback, right? Because
yes,
rather than boiling the ocean, so that you're figuring out ways to make it more actionable, in
yeah,
chunks.
I wonder about though incentivizing, because that, and I know there's no way it's totally anonymous, but I worry once you sort of like enter this incentivizing, there has to be proof that someone did it, and then that person's like, well, that means you're going to know what I said, and
because we honestly don't know who they are, so we can't. But I think there's many different versions of incentivizing, and Yvonne is right that if I'm a leader of a sub organization and it still has more than 100 people, that's still a large organization, right?
Yeah.
And I can get that feedback for myself, and as a quotes middle manager, right? I'm getting faster feedback than the rest of the organization is. So these are things that we could use. We haven't been pushing the idea of many QR codes in an implementation just for our first few, because today's topic is a perfect example, John. Like, the reason why I'm doing today's topic with you is because I'm fascinated by the idea of whether or not who's going to speak up, why are they going to speak up, what will happen after 2 weeks, what will happen after a month, right? How does this become normal? Because if it doesn't become normal, then what are we doing wrong? Right? Like, what do we have to change? What do we need to do for it to become normal? And that's really the purpose of today's topic, was to think about that from a perspective of somebody who's not living with the technology, but who's doing this just, living you live it as your life, right? Every conversation you have, to me, it seems like you're trying to get to the heart of what that person truly wants and why and what they're really going for. And so that's why I value your opinion.
Michael, remind me, is there a voice prompt from Quoala?
Not right now.
Okay.
No. There's just text and a button.
I see.
For the first versions, we wanted to avoid creating a personality, right? Like, oh, it's Cortana, but different, right? Or like we didn't want to do that. So,
I see.
but we do have to name it someday. We haven't even named it for that reason, right? So, why do you ask?
I think there's a couple different things. I've been using Reid Hoffman's new AI engine, the DeepMind Inflection Pi, and I thought I would just type, and then I started using the voice, and then you can change the voice to whatever you want it to be, just like anything. And now I'm just having conversations every morning with this person, and it's pretty fantastic. The other thing was, there's a company that for a long time was doing this thing called Jellyvision. I don't know if you ever heard of Jellyvision. Jellyvision was an interactive voice and otherwise to get through difficult decisions, mostly buying decisions, but also so it was being used for complex buying decisions and so on, trying to understand what they're saying, what they want, what choices they are looking for, and responding to them. And then you'd say something, they say something. But it was always friendly. It was very friendly, and it felt easy to just contribute things on a difficult decision. It's very old school. It's nothing AI oriented. It had maybe a little bit AI, but it was really old school. I say it because I think some people, again, have personalities where a conversation is going to be more friendly feeling than me starting from like ground zero. So
Okay. Well, we'll try to give a voice to this koala over here and have him him or her have them ask questions. So
He's an Australian accent.
yeah.
Well, could you not give the organization that you sell it to, let them name it for what they think the persona would be for their company? I mean, although that's hard because it might create a bias, because when you know your audience, you're going to talk to your audience differently. So
That would be amazing.
Like if McDonald's adopted
AI,
it.
personality changes to match the organization over time. Like, week one, it's like, please say whatever you want. And later on, it's like, what? So
I was literally picturing like Ronald McDonald's voice or whatever, like for McDonald's employees or something, or like the gecko from Geico.
yeah, have it be your company mascot. Oh my gosh.
You'd like to buy our product? Well, let me ask you, do you have a spokesperson?
Right.
All right, Jen, good people of Koala Conversations. First, I want to take a moment to thank John Kobara for being here. Thank you, John, for making the time. Really appreciate it. And then to everybody else who participated, even those who are no longer on the call, thank you very much. This brings to close the third Koala Conversations. Jerry and I will post and comment, and then we will try to figure out the topic for the next Koala Conversations.
It was nice to meet the new people. Thank you for joining. Lourdes, it was finally nice to meet you and see your smiling face. Mucho gusto, amiga. Nos vemos pronto.
So I'll hang on for a little bit
you,
until
everyone.
everybody hangs up on their own. That's just a policy I have. So you can leave whenever you want. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.